There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Byler.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Folks, going back to this case, the Ruby Franke case and Jody Hildebrandt, of course, it's a horrific case. But the prosecution this week has subpoenaed, they've actually subpoenaed these records earlier, but hospital records involved in the children of Ruby Franke. Lawyers in the case against popular YouTubers Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt, they're demanding the medical records of the two Franke children who were reportedly found injured and malnourished in August. Prosecutors have been asking for those records for some time, but the judge didn't officially sign off on the subpoena until earlier this week. One legal analyst for KUTV News in Salt Lake City, that waiting for a week or more for a judge's approval on a subpoena isn't that uncommon. He's not surprised that the prosecution didn't need those medical records right away. Well, let's face it, Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt are not going anywhere. It doesn't appear that they're getting bailed anytime soon. The prosecutors proposed the subpoena back on September 14th, but it wasn't signed off by Judge John Walton until September 25th, 11 days later. Well, that might seem like a long time for a piece of paper to be signed. Former Salt Lake County prosecutor Jeremy Deuce said it's really not. For instance, he said there was a judicial conference earlier this month and the judges might not have been able to sign off on anything. The subpoena specifically asks for hospital records about Ruby Franke's children on or about August 30th. Deuce said that the prosecution is likely looking for evidence of older injuries to establish a pattern of abuse. The things I experienced while living with Jody, I experienced being tired, I experienced being duct taped, I experienced being blindfolded, I experienced severe isolation, she told Channel 2 News in an interview on September 11th. That is from the niece, Jessie Hildebrandt. She told Channel 2 News that. Apparently, this duct taping goes back generations, and it's a sign, obviously a horrific sign of child abuse, but it's not uncommon. Jessie Hildebrandt said those tactics were considered therapy by Jody Hildebrandt. It's common in abuse cases to reveal details to doctors that they didn't reveal to investigators. Those statements are frequently found in medical records, although hearsay rules still apply. One of the scariest things in this, of course, is that we could find in a lot of abuse cases, we find old injuries, broken bones that have healed, and no one was alerted to it. Healed sometimes incorrectly, but that's very common in child abuse cases. Besides all of the horrific mental abuse that occurred in this case, the physical abuse was a real thing, and others can even attest to this, that this type of physical abuse was not something that was unusual. And going back, I think when we go back to the 911 call, that just has really shocked everyone and showed how horrific this case was. In the eyes of an outsider, we can perhaps appreciate just how bad this this abuse was.
Had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help, and he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and we know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. He's hungry and he's thirsty. He has duct taped around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around him. I think there's a good chance he's been.
He also had.
Oh, and he has been around his ankles. I mean, his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been. This kid has obviously been. I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
You know, if that doesn't get to you and pull at your heartstrings and realize that this abuse was severe, and the two people, if it's just two, could there potentially be a third? Could Kevin Franke, even though he hasn't lived with his wife, Ruby Franke, for 14 months, could he have been involved in this too? I don't think this is something that just happened overnight. But you hear in that man's voice how upset he is in seeing the things that he witnessed on this young boy. And just think of the emaciated. Can you imagine starving a child? I mean, I just can't think of how horrific that is, that you don't feed your child. And obviously, if this child was duct taped and tied, there was signs of rope cutting into his skin. Just horrific. And, you know, we look at this case and we look at these two smiling individuals here. Of course, on the left is Jody Hildebrandt on the picture I have showing on the screen. On the right is Ruby Franke. And then we look at this $3 million home that she lived in. And the fact that she was being referred clients by the clergy from the Jesus Christ Church of Latter-day Saints. It's horrific. It is absolutely horrific. And also the fact that this has been going on. For how long has this been going on? You know? And the other picture I have on the screen right now, there is Ruby Franke with her husband, Kevin. How much involvement did he have in this? How does a man not see his children for 14 months and like being bossed around by his wife? Is that the type of man you are? Was he intimidated by Jody Hildebrandt? Is that why he didn't go see his children? I find that horrific. I find give him an assist in this child abuse. And when people deny that he had any involvement, and look at, here we are on the screen, Jody Hildebrandt there. It's there's obviously some deep-seated psychological problems on anyone that could do this to children. And then you see her in this picture here, and this poor man who she was his marriage counselor, that just not only destroyed his marriage, but destroyed this man. And the power that she has, or had, now she's in jail, and hopefully shortly after a trial will go to prison. Of course, she's innocent till proven guilty, as we always say. But these charges and the evidence here are very, very strong. Just, you know, this case is disgusting. And so as we spoke about it earlier, of course, they want to get the hospital records to this case and see the injuries, in fact, that they had the night that or the day that they were recovered when the young boy ran to the neighbor's home. And then see, of course, how many other times in the past few years have they been to the doctor or been to the hospital?
And now disgraced YouTube personality is still sitting behind bars in Utah, accused of hurting her own children. And as her legal team tries to figure out how to defend her, Prosecutors are gathering evidence that could potentially put her away for years. We sit down with renowned former prosecutor Nick Ackerman to discuss what he would do if he were heading up the case against Ruby Franke. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So we're continuing our discussion of Ruby Franke. Franke, of course, the wife and mother of 6 who came to fame for her now defunct YouTube channel, 8 Passengers, a channel that boasted more than 2 million subscribers and featured videos about her parenting techniques and her...
You know, folks, one of the things that I keep sort of focusing on is the fact that someone with a YouTube channel with over 2 million subscribers, that is no joke. You are talking that she is making extremely serious money. And the other thing is that this case being a case of abuse, there's evidence from those shows. And even though it was taken down off of YouTube, law enforcement can recover all those episodes and use them as evidence against Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand, and if necessary, Kevin Franke. We spoke on previous shows that potentially Kevin Franke could be used if they determine that his involvement isn't so deep that the district attorney cannot see it in himself or in the law to offer him a deal. Kevin Franke would be an unbelievable witness. However, there is a potentiality that he also could be charged. And of course, when you watch his attorney or listen to his attorney, that's never even been discussed yet. Of course not.
life with her husband, Kevin, and 6 kids. But things certainly have changed when on August 30th, one of Ruby Franke's youngest children allegedly escaped from the home of Jody Hildebrand, Ruby's business partner. This young boy running to a neighbor for help. He was reportedly emaciated and had open wounds. That neighbor called 911, and from there, first responders found another one of Franke's children inside of the home, her 10-year-old daughter, reportedly...
Folks, besides that, the emaciated state, besides the open wounds, besides the fact that they were duct tape, what were they doing unsupervised? So they were being left alone all the time. That in itself is abuse for a 10-year-old boy and an even younger girl. So all of those things, I mean, obviously we can't even minimize the duct tape and the open wounds and the fact that they were malnourished. That in itself is enough to put someone in prison for a very long time. But add to that specifically some of the other things that we're going to find out through this investigation, through digging deep into, not even that deep. Let's have their medical records for the last 5 years. Let's x-ray them. Let's see if they have any healed old wounds, broken bones. Let's examine their body, their skin. Are there potential wounds on their skin that have healed? So all of these things are integral to a prosecution and really very scary. Sometimes when you see abusers that are affluent, that are attractive people, it's sometimes hard to believe that, this woman, Ruby Franke, did this to her own children. Jody Hildebrand was the enabler. Perhaps probably the defense that Ruby Franke is going to have is that she was brainwashed by Jody Hildebrand, that Jody Hildebrand had this power to brainwash people. Does that make sense? That is what I would think Ruby Franke is going to use as a defense, that she was powerless by this woman who was obviously being manipulated and controlled by the Church of Latter-day Saints because they were giving her clients. They were referring people to her. They obviously were happy with her work. Very scary, right? But this is what we're going to see in this case, in this potential trial.
In similar condition. Ruby Franke and that business partner, Jody Hildebrand, were arrested each face 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. I should tell you, each charge carries up to 15 years in prison. And we now know that prosecutors are seeking the medical records of these 2 children, which I imagine will be very helpful in their prosecution. So we've talked about how Franke may be able to defend herself against multiple child abuse allegations. What about the prosecution? Is this a slam dunk case, or is there more involved than we might know? How should prosecutors move forward with this case? Well, I have a very special guest to help me answer those questions.
You know, folks, a prosecution that goes to a trial is never a slam dunk. No, you know, I don't know where that term came from. I guess we use it all the time. It's a basketball metaphor, but meaning it's going to be easy peasy. There's another little expression. Going to be easy as pie. No prosecution is ever that easy. And think about how complicated this gets when they, of course, bring in the father, Kevin Franke. Although he hasn't been around for 14 months, let's dig deeper. Let's go back. Let's see his level of culpability. And what I mentioned before, Jody Hildebrandt. Did she have powers of mind control? Did she have Ruby Franke under her spell? Because I tell you the truth, when I see some of these videos of Ruby Franke, she seems possessed by something, you know. She seems crazy. She seems a little bit nutty, you know. And sorry, those are sort of like police-esque words, but she seems possessed by, you know, something that made her not think correctly, not think right, to do things that were horrific. Is that going to be her defense, that she was hypnotized by Jody Hildebrandt? Let's see.
I'm joined right now by Nick Ackerman, a man who knows his stuff when it comes to prosecuting criminals. He is an attorney, former Watergate prosecutor and assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York with decades of legal experience. Nick Ackerman, so good to see you. Thanks for coming here on Sidebar.
Great to be here.
Now let's talk. You and I haven't spoke about the Ruby Franke case yet. What are just your overall thoughts on this case?
Well, this is the kind of case that if you're on the DA's side of the fence here, you want to be certain that you bring a case that is absolutely going to be a slam dunk and is going to end up being a conviction. And so you really want to be able to cover the waterfront on all of the evidence. Obviously, there's the evidence from the children and the one situation where the police came into this scene. But there's also a past history that you really need to prove here that really makes this case an impossibility for the defense to get around. And that is if you can show all of the prior actions. And certainly one way to do it is to get a hold of any kind of doctor's records or hospital records where these kids had to be treated at some prior point in time that would reflect that the kinds of issues they had came as a result of parent neglect and something that the parents did to these children.
You know, folks, as I was speaking about earlier, obviously the prosecution subpoenaed the medical records. Going backwards, of course, in the medical records, let's see if there again are old injuries that have healed, unexplained trips to the emergency room, cuts, bruises, the fact that they were duct taped, signs of that, signs of malnutrition, signs of vitamin deficiencies, perhaps from not eating. These are all things that are indicative of this type of abuse. And this attorney, of course, is former prosecutor. Very difficult to mount a defense for this case because everything was right in your face on the YouTube channel.
Let's focus on that because that's some of the latest news is that prosecutors have been trying to obtain the medical records of these 2 children, the son and the daughter, around August 30th when all of this came to light. Is it the idea that they want these records to not only back up the claims of abuse, or is it to have it prepared in case the children decide not to testify?
Oh, I think it's both. I mean, I think even if the children do testify, you would want this kind of documentary evidence because it would corroborate what the children are saying and would take away any defense that this was some kind of made up imagination in the eyes of the children. I mean, I think it's really important that they have these records because records don't lie. And my sense is these records would go back a good period of time.
And you say the records don't lie. I guess one of the limitations or one of the issues could be when were the wounds inflicted or how they were inflicted. How accurate are these records in determining those issues for prosecutors?
Well, we're not going to know, obviously, until we actually see the records, but they would be admissible in a court of law as business records, regularly conducted activity, uh, entries that were made at or about the time that these incidents occurred, and would carry a lot of weight because this would be what the doctors observed at the time and what the children said. All of that normally might be considered hearsay, but would be admissible under the business record exception.
I was thinking, should we go into this? And then I was like, do the listeners want to get into hearsay? Real quick, explain that really quick, what you mean by that. Because,
really quickly,
yeah,
hearsay is just an out of court statement.
right.
It's what somebody else says out of court that the defense doesn't get an opportunity to cross-examine at the time. What the rules allow is an exception for a business record,
Right.
Because it's considered that those are reliable, and that it gets around the hearsay rule.
Let's talk about the kids for a second. So I imagine this would be ideal for prosecutors to have these children on the stand to explain what happened to them, allegedly at the hands of Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand. Walk us through how that works in terms of whether prosecutors, how they have that conversation with the kids to be potential witnesses, because we don't even know when this trial would happen, and whether or not they being on the stand is tough. Walk us through what that's about and how to have actually the kids as witnesses.
Yeah, it's extremely tough because you're actually asking the kids to relive what they went through before, through a traumatized situation. You're also dealing with children, minors, who aren't necessarily the most reliable witnesses in terms of memory. And it's really a matter of sitting down with them, going through it step by step. It is going to be a long, laborious process. And you really don't know how it's going to come out because they're not adults. They're not people that you normally can deal with in the same way that will have a much better memory. Some of this they may have blocked out just because it was so traumatic. So it's not the easiest situation to be in if you're in the DA's office, which is why having records are so important.
You know, folks, one of the other things, obviously, is that this would require the children to testify against their parents. How reluctant, perhaps, would a child be to testify, in this instance, against their mom and to reiterate the things that she did to them? I don't know if they would have as difficult a time in testifying against Jody Hildebrand. That might be easier for them. However, testifying against their mother could be quite a difficult thing to do. So again, this attorney records, medical records, so important in this case because they're going to go back. They're going to go back in time. They're going to go show a pattern of abuse, not abuse that just started on August, the end of August, the beginning of September, but a pattern of long-term abuse that occurred to these children.
Shh. The fact that I yell at my kids is a secret. We don't want our viewers to know.
Secrets exposed as the child abuse case.
You know, every time I watch that, and I'll play it back, she seems really like demonic to me. That, she seems like she's possessed by something. It's just the way, it's almost like you look at her face and, facial expressions. Just watch this one more time.
Amazingly well behaved for being in town.
But
For
you
like,
yelled at me.
shh. The fact that I yell at my kids is a secret. We don't want our viewers to know.
Secrets exposed as the child abuse case against YouTube mom Ruby Franke heats up.
Love is a gift that you offer because you have generated it inside yourself.
Utah prosecutors are now digging deep, searching for any and all records related to an alleged pattern of abuse involving Franke and her business partner, Jody Hildebrandt. The state filed a subpoena on September 14th, asking for medical records of two of Franke's children, her 12-year-old son and 10-year-old daughter, who were allegedly found malnourished and tied up using duct tape at the end of August. Police say the 12-year-old son escaped from Hildebrandt's home, running to a neighbor for help.
This kid has obviously been, I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
The judge just signed off on the subpoena that states Ruby Franke and her attorney must provide the medical records dated on or about August 30th for both of the young children. Based on the date requested, prosecutors are specifically looking for the hospital records for Franke's son and daughter, who were rushed into medical care once law enforcement found them bound in tape, which was found around their wrists and ankles.
He was shocked, devastated, hurt, felt deceived, didn't know any of that was going on. He hadn't seen his kids for 12 months or more.
You know, this attorney, Randy Kester, I find him not believable. Kevin Franke, what man doesn't see his children for 14 months that knows that they could be in a precarious situation, an abusive situation? What kind of man is he that doesn't go insist on seeing his children? And then this attorney just tells fairy tales when questioned about it. I have a real problem with this. And every time I see this attorney speaking on behalf of Kevin Franke, I want to know what Kevin Franke's role was in this, and is he chargeable? Is he culpable in this case? And I believe the answer probably is yes.
The attorney for Ruby Franke's husband spoke to Law and Crime Network earlier this month, explaining that his client, Kevin Franke, is still legally married to Ruby, but the two have been separated for nearly a year.
Ruby felt like there were differences in their marriage, and at one point, in conjunction with Jody Hildebrandt, it was sort of like, we have to separate to save our marriage. We'll keep working on our marriage, but for now, if we're going to repair our marriage and be back together as a family, you have to be away.
Folks, it just, to me, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The other thing, as far as the medical records, just for the 12-year-old and the 10-year-old, no. You got to get the medical records for the entire family. Every single one of those kids, except, of course, Shari and the older boy who were living outside of the house. Perhaps you should get their medical records, too, going back 5 or 10 years, and to see if they suffered any abuse. So, folks, this is a horrific case, of course. And, again, there's the picture on the screen of Ruby Franke and her husband, Kevin. And you can believe that he had no part in this. I certainly don't believe it. Folks, we're going to stay on this case. We're going to bring you all the latest news. This was the latest stuff that the subpoenaing of the medical records. And we're going to stay with this and see how this turns out. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon. Everyone have a great day, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.